I promise, I am not that guy. I am not normally that guy that does these videos. Well, here's a warning, it's going to be a rant. Hello there, I am of course Richie Stormtrooper. Welcome to the channel. I'm that bloke that you normally see behind a workbench working on Stormtrooper armour and other costumes. Welcome to the channel, and in this video I'm going to be explaining to you why I will never ever do a costume from the Star Wars Sequels Trilogy. So let's find out why. Well, when The Force Awakens came out, I was already a member of the 501st Legion. I had several costumes. I'd done a whole load of Stormtrooper costumes, TIE fighter pilot, officer, Imperial crew, etc, etc. So I was really, my expectations were reasonable. I didn't expect the world, but I was really intrigued to see what they were going to do with the costumes, how they were going to see the future of particularly Stormtroopers. And The Force Awakens came out and the costumes were great, really great. Me being a big Stormtrooper fan, I obviously paid more attention to the Stormtroopers, and they were great. I think those in particular were a superb vision of the evolution of the Stormtrooper from the original trilogy to like a more modern version. It was very much in the spirit of Star Wars. It was recognisable as the Star Wars universe, but it was a newer, shinier, modern take on it all. I thought the First Order looked absolutely great. They looked in touch with the original trilogy, and also the evolution of the Stormtrooper from the original clones, which is incidentally one of the things that I really liked about the prequels. The original clones, I thought, were a well thought out evolution from the kind of Mandalorian, the Boba Fett type face mask to the more Stormtrooper type helmet later on. I thought it all made sense, and in The Force Awakens, the First Order troopers, they carried on that tradition for me. There were some beautiful looking costumes. I thought Kylo Ren himself looked great. The Knights of Ren, they looked really cool to me. I was obviously, as a costuming fan and a new fan of the new trilogy, the Sequels Trilogy, because The Force Awakens was a great movie. I had not so high expectations. I didn't know what to expect, but I really enjoyed it and was definitely on board. So as a costuming nerd, I was already getting itchy and looking to maybe get a new costume from The Force Awakens. Anovos did that run on Stormtrooper armours, and I very nearly got on board with that. So what's my problem with it now? If the costumes are so great, why am I never going to do one? Well folks, yes, I'm afraid you've guessed it. This is going to be another rant about the Rise of Skywalker. It's put the final nail in the coffin for me for the trilogy, and it means I'm never going to do a sequels costume. When I said at the beginning of this video that I am not that guy, I am not that bloke that uploads a massive rant about Star Wars fans. I'm not. I don't normally do this kind of thing. I'm not the type of guy that says George Lucas ruined my childhood because of the prequels. I don't like the prequels. I went to the cinema to see A Phantom Menace, and I can still remember the feeling of complete bafflement when I came out. I didn't even really know what had happened, so I didn't even bother going to see the other two at the cinema. I watched them sometime later on DVD, and I found them equally unwatchable. I think I've seen them all 3 or 4 times now, and they're just really badly made movies. For me, unwatchable. But it doesn't matter. I'm not the type of guy that's going to say, oh, George Lucas ruined my childhood. No, George Lucas brought out some films that I didn't like. George Lucas made 3 of the most important films ever made. And certainly to me, the original trilogy is still the original trilogy. And for me, I have absolutely no problem in seeing the original trilogy in isolation. It was all we had for many years, and it was fine. It was near perfect. And I'm also not one of those people who was either in the totally anti The Last Jedi camp or totally for The Last Jedi camp. I'm certainly not one of those that jumped on the bandwagon with a not my Luke and all this and ruined Star Wars and this is not Star Wars. I'm also not the type of fan that, now being in my mid-40s, doesn't realise that when the original movies came out that I was a little kid and I watched them through the eyes of a little kid. No, I'm quite capable of watching a children's movie and seeing it as such, just like my parents were back then. They enjoyed the films just as much as I did. And a well-made family movie is just as good as any adult movie. And to be honest, I don't even really hate The Rise of Skywalker. I enjoyed it pretty much at the cinema each time I saw it. It's got some great set pieces, it's fast-moving, it's action. J.J. Abrams always makes beautiful-looking films, and there are some bits of fan service in there that really got me, that I actually fell for. Something that's a bit more cheesy than the rest, and others are a little bit too cheesy, but all in all, it's a fun movie as a standalone movie. I don't hate it. I don't love it, but I don't hate it. The key being, for me, is that it doesn't work as part of a trilogy, even less as part of the saga. And I'm going to have to keep on insisting. I'm really not the guy that makes these rants, but this time I was lured in. When The Force Awakens came out, I was intrigued to see what they'd done. I didn't have excessively high expectations like some. So when I went to the cinema, I was pleasantly surprised. As I say, it looked absolutely wonderful. The costumes, I loved them. They were great. And also, I think J.J. Abrams was absolutely the right man to direct it. He's an expert of getting the feel of things right. If you think about Super 8, his brief was pretty much make E.T. and the Goonies in one movie and make it feel like the 80s. And it's absolutely spot on. And make it an emotional, character-based drama as well. Brilliant. Absolutely perfect. One of my favourite movies. And The Force Awakens did exactly that. Of course, there were a lot of comments to the effect that it was a soft reboot and there was nothing original to it, and it largely followed the plots of mainly A New Hope, but also some of the other Star Wars films. But so what? I really enjoyed it. And I think what it was particularly successful at doing was introducing the new generation. It was more than just pure fan service. It introduced new characters, Finn and Rey and Kylo. Certainly in my case, by the end of it, I was invested in this new generation and I wanted to know how their story was going on. So it was a great setup. For me, it gave the new trilogy, a whole lot of potential. And the story after that, for me, is the story of mismanagement and the failure to fulfill that potential. After that, they never did justice to the things that they set up in The Force Awakens for me. As I've already said, I'm not one of these haters that really, really hated The Last Jedi. I really thoroughly enjoyed The Last Jedi. I'm even unusual in that the whole Canto Bight sequence I found was really enjoyable. I kind of accepted that because of the commercial restraints. I found it completely unnecessary, and it did make the movie too long, and it was an unnecessary distraction. But the sequences themselves were fine. I found them very enjoyable. In particular, the development of the story of the children working there in the stables, the guy with the fireworks. It's nearly New Year's Eve, and that's when all the fireworks come out here in Germany. So there's going to be the odd bang here and there. When it was announced that Rian Johnson was going to get his own trilogy, the thought of that it was maybe going to be based on the kids in the stable, the Force-sensitive kid that summons his broom using the Force. That was all really exciting. But I did come out of that film worried that Rian Johnson had... I admit it, he was openly trolling a lot of us, and he really, really did kind of stick two fingers up, as we say in Britain. Stick two fingers up, or flick the bird. Really discarded so much of what we thought had been set up in The Force Awakens. The idea of Rey being a nobody, killing Snoke. Snoke was quite obviously set up as a new version of the Emperor. I enjoyed it. I thought it was bold. I welcomed the fact that they did something with this second movie that was a bit different. Empire Strikes Back really did break with a lot of the tone of A New Hope. So, I applauded that. But I think what happened here was whoever's in charge, Lucasfilm, Disney or whatever, they made The Force Awakens and they listened. I think all along they listened too much to feedback from fans, or at least They tried to please all of the people all of the time, and the result in The Rise of Skywalker was too much fan service and too much almost breaking the fourth wall. What I thought happened was they made The Force Awakens, it was a successful soft reboot, but they didn't want to hear accusations of it being no more than a soft reboot, and they felt under pressure to do something bold, obviously buoyed by the success of The Force Awakens at the box office. I think they maybe got cocky and a bit worried about making Empire Strikes Back Mark II. So they handed over the reins to Rian Johnson and really did give him carte blanche. It was probably a mistake, and the making of The Rise of Skywalker confirms to me that they were admitting as such that this was a mistake. For me it was fine. I think some of the things that were set up were workable. I really did think the idea of Rey being a nobody was much more interesting than her being related to whoever it was. It turns out it's the Emperor. I do have a slight problem with the Emperor coming back. More on that later. But I really like the idea of that the Force is not specific to a couple of families. It is not the property of Jedis. It flows through all of us. It's nature. It's a natural force, and a nobody like Rey, as she was presumed to be, or maybe not presumed to be, depending on how you interpreted it at the time, she was quite capable of being very strong with the Force. I liked that. I thought it was refreshing, and I think having set that up, it would have been better to go with it. I liked the fact that Snoke, the all-powerful Snoke, was gone. It set us up to have Rey and Kylo as the most powerful two in that world, and it was going to be more about their development. There was no other direct distractions. I would have loved it to have been more about them. I think they would have developed even further. There was more development of characters in general in the whole of the film in The Last Jedi than there was in The Rise of Skywalker, because I think The Rise of Skywalker was just rushed. The first third of the film, The Rise of Skywalker, was undoing and trying to delete everything that happened in The Last Jedi, basically saying we've listened to all the haters and we're going to undo everything. So essentially, in the end, The Last Jedi became completely superfluous. Pretty much everything good and bad that it set up was discarded, and they tried to make Episode 8, the new version of Episode 8, together with The Rise of Skywalker. And I would have been fine had they, right from the start, said, right, we're going to play this safe, we're going to give the whole lot to J.J. Abrams, we're going to use other writers, because it's very important to note that the Force Awakens wasn't written by J.J. Abrams. The dialogue in The Rise of Skywalker, I am sorry, but sometimes it is really prequels level clunky. It is so unnatural and so cringeworthy. He's a great director. The jury's out as to whether he's a writer, and there's quite obviously tension there as well. There's a conflict between Lucasfilm, Disney, whoever on the one side, and Rian Johnson on the other, and J.J. Abrams is like, right, I set some stuff up and you threw it all overboard, so everything that you've done, I'm now going to undo it too. And they tried to package it in jokes, like when Luke comes, Luke's Force Ghost appears at the end. Hello. Luke's Force Ghost appears at the end and catches the lightsaber and says, oh, you've got to be more respectful with a Jedi's weapon. Kind of funny in the first moment, but almost breaking the fourth wall. And the thing with the Chewbacca's medal as well, far too cheesy. I admit, I'm a hypocrite. The first time I saw it, it really got me. I was nearly crying, but then I thought about it afterwards, and it was like, who's this for? This is for like 45-year-old babies that have been whinging ever since A New Hope that Chewbacca didn't get a medal. Most normal cinema goers are not going to get it. This is like, a nod. It's all Disney. Look, ooh, we get it. We've been reading the forums. Doesn't work for me. Sorry. Whether you like the idea of it always being the Emperor behind the scenes all the time and all the Sith hidden away on some planet. Look, as I said, I can watch Star Wars through the eyes of a child. It's dumb, it's big and it's stupid, it's crash bang wallop, and it doesn't matter. You've got to accept Star Wars is not sensible. Star Wars is not Star Trek. Star Wars is not scientific. It's a fairy tale, and some really stupid stuff happens, and you have to accept magic, space magic and stuff like that. It's okay. When it does become a problem for me is when it has to be explained, and for me much of the first half of the Rise of Skywalker was explaining. It was so much exposition, really bad dialogue, and out of necessity trying to cram into 2.5 hours for essentially 2 films, because it was the Last Jedi doesn't count anymore. That was all a joke. We're going to quickly explain this by exposition in bad dialogue. That no, Rey really is actually the granddaughter of Palpatine. Everything else that was set up in The Last Jedi is also nonsense. You just can't do it. But as I say, after The Force Awakens, they got cocky. They handed the whole thing over to a young, exciting director and let him do what he wanted with it. And he trolled us a bit. He did his own thing. He called their bluff. And then after that, there was so much hate. The Rotten Tomatoes score for The Last Jedi is about 50% amongst fans, not critics. I think the critics liked it more. The Rise of Skywalker is the complete opposite at the moment. The critics aren't that convinced and the fans love it still. I think that'll change over time. I think it takes you on a roller coaster ride. It's so fast. It doesn't let you stop and think. I've seen it 3 times. My first viewing was, what the fuck? They've got this MacGuffin and they're looking for another MacGuffin, and then, oh, this happens. I actually genuinely got bored a few times, but I had the feeling I didn't have time to think, so I had to process my thoughts really afterwards. I think when you step back and view it as part of the trilogy, it's just a sign of mismanagement of the whole project. After The Last Jedi, after they got cocky, they handed it over to this guy who did basically whatever the fuck he wanted with it, and a lot of people hated it. The original plan was not to have J.J. Abrams direct Episode 9, but they panicked. Management panicked, and they said, oh shit, this has gone wrong somewhere. We were too cocky, we're going to have to play it safe again. So essentially, they got J.J. Abrams back in to rewrite or practically delete Episode 8, The Last Jedi, and start again, and it was just really unhealthy for a film. I'm not totally on board with the idea of Palpatine coming back, but obviously I had to accept it. And my biggest fear after hearing the laughter in the trailer and seeing Ian McDiarmid when he appeared on stage was that they were going to do some kind of time travel thing, so thank God they didn't go down that route. That was really going to be a big problem for me. So I kind of accepted it. It's a symptom of today's, I call it Marvel syndrome. I like a lot of the Marvel movies, the Iron Man standalone movies. In fact, most of the standalone movies up until Thor or whatever, I was watching most of them and found them all really enjoyable. But then the Avengers movies started coming out, and it was like, these are computer games. It was, in every movie there were more and more characters crammed in to one whole big clusterfuck, and every time you got to the end, there was another bigger, bolder final opponent. There was this big enemy that had to be bigger extra time. It was Ultron or whatever his name was, a guy with the glove. I had to abandon it in the end. There was just like no room in these movies for so many characters. Each time it was the same story. There's some big scary thing coming to blow up the earth, and he was going to blow up the earth even worse than last time, and he was bigger and even scarier than the last one. It's like a computer game. At each level or a PlayStation game. Each level you meet another more powerful final opponent, and it's just boring after a while. Boring. Whilst there was no space in the movie for Rose, for whatever reason, to have a real part in the plot, they crammed in at least 4 or 5 other new characters that didn't really have any role. And it was like, you were already going to be rushing this just to try and delete the memory of The Last Jedi. So why cram in more plot lines and more characters now? It's just going to get crowded. And there was no development. There was no character development. It was an exercise in tying things up, which is fine. You've got to try and tie it up. And then Palpatine as the big endgame type character who was dead. This whole thing, it got silly. I know Star Wars is silly. It's okay. Star Wars can be silly, and obviously people are not dead when they're dead. Force ghosts come back. People are never really gone, I think was the line from, I think it only came in the trailer, correct me if I'm wrong. Nobody ever really dies. The idea of loss, any kind of loss, was just lost. We finally saw Princess Leia die, and it was just, yeah, alright. Yeah, she died reaching out to her son, using all that energy, and then he died instantly, but then was resurrected in the next 5 seconds. And at the end, he pops up and resurrects Rey to die. It's like, for me, there's no feeling of loss. That was not a worthy send-off for Carrie Fisher, in my opinion. I didn't feel anything. The Emperor being brought back alive didn't just devalue the idea of loss and death in the movies, but it also devalued the original trilogy for me. That was the ultimate moment of redemption, when Darth Vader throws the Emperor down the shaft, finally turning back to the light side. It turns out it wasn't final after all. I don't hate the movie. It has a lot of enjoyable moments, set pieces, looks great, exciting, Star Warsy feeling. I actually think the way they handled Rey's reveal as the granddaughter of Palpatine was pretty good. But overall, this movie as part of a trilogy doesn't work for me, because it was so painfully obvious that the first half or the first third of the movie was just distancing itself from The Last Jedi, and as part of the saga it absolutely does not work for me, because if I accept it as part of the trilogy, first of all, it requires me to disregard Episode 8, a movie that I actually enjoyed. At the time, I was worried that they were never going to recover from it. It disregarded much too much, only for J.J. Abrams to come back in Episode 9 and say, no, we're opening this door again, and that door was a fake door, we're going to close that door and open this door. It just doesn't work. So for me, it's not part of a trilogy. I can't enjoy it anymore. Of course, if it's not part of the trilogy, I cannot accept it as part of the saga. That's not a big problem for me. As I say, I really, really do not like the prequels, and I just don't watch them. I disregard them. I can watch the original trilogy in isolation. Up until recently, I was also able to watch The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi as a continuation of the story after the original trilogy, but not anymore. It's been the story of mismanagement and conflict and chopping and changing. It doesn't make for a comprehensive trilogy, and it certainly, if I accept all this nonsense with Palpatine and coming back, it really does devalue the original trilogy. So, sorry, I'm not on board anymore. I'm not usually that type of person to post these rants. I hope it's been more balanced. I'm not angry. I'm slightly disappointed. The problem being was that when I went to see The Force Awakens, I was instantly on board again. It worked. It was a great soft reboot, and it got me invested in some new characters, and I was then very optimistic and very intrigued to see how it was going to develop, what was their future going to be like. Episode 8 was some kind of progression, further development of the characters in a surprising direction, and obviously too surprising for too many people. The Rise of Skywalker was an exercise in commercial damage limitation, deleting everything that had gone before it from episode 8, and an absolutely impossible task of making a coherent movie out of it. It totally didn't work for me, I'm sorry. It was different with the prequels because I went to see A Phantom Menace, as I say, at the cinema, didn't like it, came out of the cinema feeling completely bemused and was never really invested in it. So sometime later, much later, I got them on DVD and watched them as I was getting into the costuming thing, kind of more out of obligation than anything else, and still didn't like them. So they just didn't count. I was kind of detached from it all. The big difference was that I wasn't detached anymore. The Force Awakens drew me in, and I was a big fan. In the end, it was disappointing, and I'm not the ranty type of guy. I'm going to calm down. I'm not going to get too upset about it, and it's just going to be... I'm just going to have to confine this other trilogy to its own separate world. It's a shame, because it had so much potential. And that, of course, is the reason that I can't ever do a sequels costume. I dress up as a Stormtrooper because I love the original trilogy. I can remember the moment I first saw those Stormtroopers busting through the door with Darth Vader behind them at the beginning of A New Hope, Star Wars as it was called back then, Episode 4 nowadays, playing with the little figures as a kid, seeing The Empire Strikes Back and seeing Return of the Jedi and loving it even more and more. I've got into Star Wars costuming because that child in me never died, and instead of playing with the little figures, I wanted to play as a life-size figure and be that Stormtrooper. If I'd have seen these new movies at the age of 10, would it have been any different? Maybe. I've probably been a lot less critical of it, but I don't think they're anywhere near as good. They were never going to be anywhere near as good, but I didn't demand that. So for me, in my own Star Wars universe, the sequels don't really exist. It's a shame. Maybe someday I'll be able to put on the Blu-ray of The Force Awakens and enjoy it. But watching episode 8 and episode 9 will always remind me that it was a mismanaged project with lots of opportunities missed. And it's a shame. Well, I hope this rant wasn't too negative. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on the matter. Did you love the movie? Did you hate the movie? Did you think the Sequels Trilogy was a success, a failure, something in between? If you liked the video, and if you're into Star Wars costuming, or maybe horror costuming, any sci-fi movies, whatever, this is possibly a place for you. Like and subscribe, have a look around. At the moment I'm posting 2 videos per week, Tuesdays and Fridays, and I will be continuing after this video with our usual Stormtrooper armor build tutorial. So I hope to see you there. Take care.